Olympics. There were 3 of them.
Yeah.
My mother used to get us up every morning, we had to exercise to jump.
To John Gambling.
Yeah.
And Fred Feldman used to do their traffic, so.
Uh-huh.
So I got them talking about something else.
See? Yeah.
Well, good afternoon,
Good
and thank you for being here, and excuse me for being late, but when there's just a little rain on the hutch, it
Yeah,
just
gets flooded.
gets flooded. So my name is Evan Weiner, and well, it's something to do with armed forces, and 1940 certainly is something to do with armed forces. VE Day is no longer celebrated when the Allies had their victory in Europe in May of 1945, but this is 1940, and America is preparing to go to war. There's Hitler in Paris, as opposed to April in Paris,
Yeah.
and the Axis powers, Mussolini and Hitler. Churchill from England. And there's a war brewing in the Pacific, and this is what gets the United States into the war eventually. The Japanese-Chinese War, the Sino-Japanese War of 1940. The Winter War ends between the Soviet Union and Finland. Italy officially joins the war in 1940. The concentration camps open in 1940. And these guys look familiar to you? Take a closer look at them. They are Moe, Larry, and Curly. They are the Three Stooges. And the Three Stooges have a place in history. They are the first on film to lampoon Adolf Hitler, and with that, Hitler put them on his hit list. And they are basically Moe is the head of the country of Moronica. And there's Charlie Chaplin. He is also lampooning Hitler in 1940. The movie studios feel that it's okay to go after Hitler finally. Hattie McDaniel won an Academy Award. But there was an election in 1940, the presidential election, and Franklin Roosevelt makes history ever since the days of George Washington saying, I'm not going to serve forever, I'm not going to be a king, I'm going to serve 2 terms and that's it. There was a tradition. Nobody ever ran for president for a 3rd term, but Franklin Roosevelt breaks that tradition. His opponent is Wendell L. Willkie. He's from Indiana. He's a lawyer. He's a successful businessman, and formerly the head of the Commonwealth and Southern Corporation, which provided electricity to 11 states. Why is Roosevelt running again? Well, because of the war. The war is looming over the election. And FDR and Willkie are concerned about Britain being bombed on a daily basis by Nazi Germany, and they want to help out. But there was a segment in Willkie's Republican Party that was in favor of American isolationism. And FDR was hamstrung by a series of legislation that would not allow him to help America's allies. Remember, it was America First back in those days, Charles Lindbergh. And there is Roosevelt. Roosevelt didn't want to campaign for a 3rd term initially, but he was driven by worsening conditions in Europe, and he and his allies sought to diffuse challenges from other party leaders such as James Farley and the Vice President John Nance Gardner. But Roosevelt would get the nomination from the Democratic Party on the first ballot, while Gardner was replaced on the ticket by the Secretary of Agriculture, Henry Wallace. And there's Wendell Willkie, or as in the cartoon that Bugs Bunny takes on the Gremlin, Wendell Willkie, for peace, preparedness, and prosperity. He's a dark horse candidate. He defeated the conservative Ohio Senator Robert A. Taft and the prosecutor, Thomas E. Dewey, who now has his name on the New York State Thruway, the Dewey Thruway. Nobody ever calls it the Dewey Thruway, though, but that's the official name, the Thomas E. Dewey Thruway. And so, on the 6th ballot of the 1940 Republican nomination, it's Willkie as the candidate. Roosevelt promised there would be no involvement in foreign wars if he's reelected. Remember, this is the guy who wouldn't help out the Jewish refugees on the St. Louis, the boat that was bringing about 900 refugees to the Western Hemisphere. Cuba said no. The United States said no. Canada said no, so it went back to Europe. Willkie criticized perceived incompetence and wasted the New Deal, and he warned of the dangers of breaking the two-term tradition, and accused Roosevelt of secretly planning to take the country into World War II. Europe is in flames. Even though the Finland-Soviet War ended, the Spanish Civil War ended in 1939, there was still a war going on there. And there were problems in the Pacific Ocean with Japan and China. This is the presidential election. Roosevelt would win handily. And you can see Willkie carried not too many states, and Roosevelt is reelected. Willkie won Maine and Vermont and Indiana and Michigan and Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Colorado. And Roosevelt carried the big state, New York, which had 47 electoral votes in those days. Willkie's association with big business damaged him. Many working class voters said it was corporations and business leaders who were responsible for the Great Depression. And at this point, the Great Depression is only 11 years in the rearview mirror, and there were a lot of problems in the 1930s. I don't know how many of your parents had problems in the 1930s, but there were bread lines, Hoovervilles, all this other stuff, fresh in everybody's memory. And there was American isolationism. This is 1940. I did not raise my boy to die for Britain. Mother's Crusade. I don't get this one. Send Halifax to Halifax. That doesn't make any sense to me. Benedict Arnold tried it. Treason. That doesn't make any sense to me either. The Neutrality Act of 1935 prohibited exporting arms and ammunition to any foreign nation at war. 1937, there's a new Neutrality Act which prohibited Americans from traveling on ships owned by any belligerent nation, and declared that American-owned ships could not carry any arms intended for war zones. And yet you got this war that broke out in 1939. You got Germany against Britain, Germany about ready or taking over France by this point, and you got the problems with the Soviets and the Germans in Eastern Europe. 1938, 20 years after World War I had ended, 70% of Americans polled believed that the United States participation in World War I was a mistake. Germany invades Poland. That was on September 1st, 1939. And 2 days later, France and England declare war on Germany. The war was not called World War II yet. It wasn't a world war. It was just known as the emergency. Americans who were polled, excuse me, the emergency. It was just an emergency. That's, Germany had taken, by this point, had taken Austria, had taken Czechoslovakia. In fact, they were given Czechoslovakia on a platter by Neville Chamberlain, the English Prime Minister, in 1938. And they were going westward, France and England, and going northward into the Scandinavian countries. A majority of people said that, even if Nazi Germany wins in Great Britain or France, we're not getting involved. It's their war. Let them fight it. And of course, there's the American First Committee, and that is Charles Lindbergh. And Charles Lindbergh was the guy who was the face of the American First Committee, although he wasn't the only one. Future presidents, John F. Kennedy, Gerald Ford, members of the American First Committee.
He was a Nazi anyway.
Who? Lindbergh. Lindbergh. American First Committee, founded in September 1940 by a group of Yale law students. The students were led by R. Douglas Stewart, Jr., and they gathered prominent Americans to serve on the organization's board. At the height of the American First movement, it had 800,000 members in 650 chapters. And there's Henry Ford, another one. In fact, in 1931, Adolf Hitler singled out Henry Ford, saying that he learned a lot about America from Henry Ford. And of course, Henry Ford had the Dearborn Independent and came out with the hoax about the A bunch of Jews sitting around and basically plotting everything going on in the world. The president of the American Olympic Committee, Avery Brundage, who sat down Marty Glickman and Sam Stoller in the 1936 Olympics when the two Jews from Brooklyn, Glickman, who I actually worked for in 1988 with his broadcasting school, and I knew Stoller, who ran the Milrose Games, they were going to be on the 4x100 meter relay team for the United States, and they were sat down by Brundage and Dean Cromwell. And oddly enough, Glickman was replaced by Jesse Owens, who stole the show in 1936. Also on the board, the Hormel Foods chief executive, Jay Hormel, Henry Ford, Alice Roosevelt Longworth, Teddy Roosevelt's daughter, General Hugh Johnson, who had been the director of the National Recovery Act. They were all board members. Also, politicians, Burton Wheeler, Democratic senator from Montana, Gerald Nye, a Republican senator from North Dakota, and Robert Taft, who was looking to get the 1940 Republican nomination. They served as important spokespeople for the organization. And here is here's Lindbergh giving a speech, Defend America First, and you got George Washington behind Lindbergh. Wrap your arms around the flag, or in this case, wrap your arms around Washington. The worsening global situation was becoming impossible to ignore. Now, Nazi Germany had annexed Austria and Germany in 1938, conquered Poland, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. Great Britain was the only major European power left standing against Hitler's war machine. But isolationists in the United States thought that the dispute was between foreign nations. Let's not get involved. The American best policy for the United States was to build up its own defenses and avoid antagonizing anybody. Neutrality, combined with the power of the U.S. military and the protection of two oceans, the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, should keep Americans safe. At least that's what America First Committee thought. Life's good in the United States finally. It's been over a decade since, or it's been just about a decade since the stock market crash in 1929. The Great Depression is finally easing, and Americans are earning more and buying more, and they're buying more goods, and it's fueling the economy. But Roosevelt is convinced that sooner or later, America's going to have to fight Germany and Japan, and he methodically begins to prepare for a war. I got a question for you. How many of your relatives or people you knew fought in World War II? You did. Who fought? A parent? Who did you know?
My whole family.
Your whole did they ever talk about it? No, they never talked about it. People who went off to fight in World War II never talked about it, except in rare cases. So, 1940, we're going to war. The Select Training and Service Act, which basically said, we're drafting you. The Select Training and Service Act of 1940, or the Burke-Wadsworth Act, was enacted on September 16th. It was the first peacetime conscription in the United States history. Basically, it was this. Anybody who was over the age of 21 and had not reached their 36th birthday had to register with draft boards. Meanwhile, Hitler's got all the fighting people that he needs. There he is, getting the Heil Hitler salute. Hitler, he rose to power in Germany, which was economically handicapped and politically unstable. And he becomes the chancellor in 1933. And basically, the world ignored him. 1936 Olympics, they validated him. 49 nations went there. 1938, he starts taking Austria, starts taking Czechoslovakia, and Neville Chamberlain in England said to Czechoslovakians, don't worry about it, let them take a piece of you, and oh, by the way, if you want help, we're not going to give it to you. And then in 1939, he makes an invasion. He rearmed the nation. He wasn't supposed to do that, starting in 1935, and signed treaties with Italy and Japan. He has ambitions of world domination. Hitler's invasion on September 1st, 1939 drove Great Britain and France to declare war, and that starts the beginning of World War II. And there's another picture of Hitler. He was eager to follow up his victory over Poland in 1939 by attacking in the west. He decides to go that way. But bad weather forced the planned offensive to be postponed. In January 1940, a German plane crashed in neutral Belgium with a copy of attack orders on board. Hitler would change his plans. On November 10th, German air raids on Belgium and Holland, followed by parachute drops and attacks by ground forces, led to quick victories. The speed of the German advance and the brutality of the air raids gave them a huge psychological advantage, and on May 14th, the Dutch surrendered. And by the way, I have been in Rotterdam, and I should have pictures of it by the way. And there are still areas of Rotterdam where you see the bomb damage. And it's kind of interesting because they built around it, but they left some areas of bomb damage in Rotterdam. The Battle of Dunkirk. The British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, resigns under pressure on May 13th, making way for a new wartime coalition headed by Winston Churchill. The Miracle of Dunkirk. Well, there may not have been the Miracle of Dunkirk. The BEF and its allies forced back on the French port of Dunkirk, located on the shores of the North Sea, about 10 kilometers or 6.2 miles from the Belgian border. British command opposed evacuation, and French forces wanted to hold on as well. Churchill soon became convinced evacuation was the only option. The small town Dunkirk was on the coast of France, and that was the scene of a massive military campaign. The Battle of Dunkirk lasted May 26th to June 4th. About 338,000 British expedition forces and other Allied troops were evacuated from Dunkirk to England as German forces closed in on them. Hitler in Dunkirk. On May 24th, Hitler gave the order to halt the advance of the German panzer divisions bearing down on Dunkirk. Hitler's decisions were attributed to his general's worry over a possible Allied counterattack, as well as Luftwaffe commander Hermann Göring's insistence that his air force could prevent any evacuation attempt at Dunkirk. Hitler gave the tanks the go-ahead on May 26th, but by that time the Allies had gained crucial time to put their preparations in place. The largely successful evacuation of the bulk of Britain's trained troops from near annihilation proved to be a key moment in the Allied war effort. Germany had hoped to defeat the Brits at Dunkirk, and that the Brits would just split, get out of there. The Miracle of Dunkirk became a rallying cry for the duration of the war. This was their finest hour. I don't know, but this is what Churchill said. "We shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." I think I had to memorize that in elementary school. I'm pretty sure I had to memorize that. Anyway, the finest hour speech. Now, I think it was junior high school. Despite the successful evacuation at Dunkirk, thousands of French troops were left behind, taken prisoner by advancing Germans. Also abandoned on the shores of Dunkirk were massive supplies of ammunition, machine guns, tanks, motorcycles, jeeps, and anti-aircraft artillery. With Western Europe abandoned by its main defenders, the German army swept through France. Henri Pétain signed an armistice with the Nazis at Compiègne. German annexed half of France, leaving the other half in the hands of their puppet rulers. All through the years. Well, France, did they do this to help themselves out, or were they sympathetic to the Germans? It's never really been answered. Invading France. The Battle of France begins on June 5th. Germans striking southwards from the River Somme. The Germans destroyed Allied forces in the field in short order. The Germans launched a major offensive on Paris on June 9th and on June 13th. Paris was declared an open city as the French government fled to Bordeaux. The first German troops entered the capital on June 14th, a little more than a month after the campaign began. Meanwhile, this 1939 deal between Mussolini and Hitler kicks in. Initially, when Germany invaded Poland, Benito Mussolini said, "Hey Adolf, nice knowing you. Let me know what goes on, because we're not going to be there." But they're there eventually. Pact of Steel, pact of friendship and alliance between Germany and Italy, political and military alliance, was signed on May 22nd. Now, France is on the verge of collapse, and the Italian fascist dictator, Benito Mussolini, decides, hey, you know what, this thing, let's go. We can get involved because they're kind of out of it. So on June 10th, Italy finally enters the war, about 9 months after Mussolini said no. And there's Hitler in Paris. Hitler in Paris. The end comes in France on June 22nd. France surrenders. Hitler insisted on signing the document of capitulation in the same railway carriage used when Germany surrendered to the Allies in 1918. And of course, Hitler was a soldier, even though he was Austrian, for Germany back in World War I. Well, this is Philippe Pétain, and he is now the leader, the supreme leader of France. He's given incredible powers. With the German army occupying 2/3 of the country, Pétain believed he could repair the ruin caused by the invasion and obtain the release of numerous prisoners of war by cooperating with Germany. Of course, it failed. Pétain embarked on a period of wait and see dealing with Germany, and his Vichy government became a cooperative state. Full-scale invasion of Britain. That's next on the table. Hitler's got everything, just about everything in Western Europe, and the crowning jewel would be Britain, if he could get it. On July 16th, Hitler releases a directive. Let's cross the English Channel. Full-scale invasion of Britain. The aim of this operation will be to eliminate the English homeland as base for the prosecution of the war against Germany, and if necessary, to occupy it completely. That was directive number 16. Following Germany's defeat, or the Germany defeat of France in June 1940, Hitler expected the English, in their hopeless military situation, to engage in peace talks. As such, he put off long-term plans for an invasion of the English of England through the English Channel. This is what he was going to do. He was going to come from Belgium, Bruges, nice city. He was going to come from France, and he was going to come from Cherbourg, where Normandy is, and he was going to just invade England from the south. Pending success in dominating Britain's airspace, a first wave of German army troops, including anti-aircraft artillery, would be carried across the channel by naval warships. The invasion would be called Operation Sea Lion, and would stretch along a long section of the British coastline from the city of Ramsgate to the Isle of Wight. The Luftwaffe, they were going to fight for superiority of the air, and they're going to invade through the air. But the Royal Air Force pilots held their own. And the key fight in this barrage came to be known as the Battle of Britain. The RAF lost 544 pilots, but they inflicted damage on Hitler's Air Force, and he withdrew his plans for Operation Sea Lion. It was the first time people realized that Hitler was not invincible. But there was the Blitz, and Edward R. Murrow made his name because of the Blitz. On September 7th, 300 German bombers raid London, first of 57 consecutive nights of bombing. Hitler wanted to neutralize Britain so that he could concentrate on his plans in the East. After all, even though he wasn't at war with the Soviet Union, he wanted payback for years and years of fighting between Germans, Prussians, and the Soviets or the Russians. So he wanted to do this land invasion. He didn't want anybody to interfere. The Luftwaffe dropped bombs on London and other strategic cities across Britain. The attacks were authorized by Germany's Chancellor, Adolf Hitler, after the British carried out a nighttime air raid of Berlin. Edward R. Murrow, who was a great journalist because he was not afraid to ask a question, and he didn't do, well, both sides did it because Murrow never believed in both sidesism. Murrow believed you ask your question and don't worry about, well, what's the other side going to think? Never worried about that, and that's what a journalist is supposed to do. Anyway, Murrow brings the blitzkrieg to Americans. And also Murrow comes up with his signature phrases. He began by saying, "This is London," and he ended his reports with "good night and good luck." That was a phrase that Londoners used to end their conversations when they were not certain they'd be able to see each other the next day. And of course that is what it looked like. The Germans were on the brink of victory in late August. The Luftwaffe had lost more than 600 aircraft. Although the RAF lost fewer than half that many, the battle was claiming British fighters and experienced pilots at too great a rate. But for some reason, Hitler changed his strategy. In late August, the Germans dropped some bombs, apparently by accident, on civilian areas in London. On August 25th, the Brits retaliated by launching a bombing raid on Berlin. Hermann Göring insisted that such an attack was an impossibility because of the city's formidable air defense network. Didn't work, Hermann. The raid was so infuriating that Hitler ordered the Luftwaffe to switch attacks from RAF sites to London and other cities. The Germans expanded the Blitz to other cities in November. Hitler's intention, break the morale of the people of Britain, so they would pressure their government to surrender. Well, while this is going on in Europe, this thing is really capturing Roosevelt's eye. The Second Sino-Japanese War. This is Franklin Roosevelt's Pacific problem. The Second Sino-Japanese War conflict broke out in 1937 when China began a full-scale resistance to the expansion of Japanese influence in its territory, which really started in 1931. The Japanese came to feel that Chiang Kai-shek and his Chinese nationalist government would not yield to their wishes, and they must be eliminated. Japanese puppet was Wang Qingwei. In 1940, in the occupied regions, Japan tried to win support and lessen its military burden by setting up a puppet regime in Nanking. All this maneuvering in China captures Franklin Roosevelt's attention. As Hawaii. In fact, that plaque said that Mark Twain stood in the very same spot that I was standing in Hawaii. It seemed like every place in the West I went, Mark Twain was there, which always I couldn't figure out who paid for it, right? Anyway, Mark Twain was there, and that's Honolulu. I bring up Honolulu because Roosevelt makes some moves. The U.S. Pacific Fleet relocates to Hawaiian waters in 1940. FDR wanted Japan out of China. He tells the Admiral James O. Richardson, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, that retaining the fleet in Hawaiian waters after it concluded large-scale maneuvers in the spring of 1940 would exercise a restraining influence on the actions of Japan. And you know where he kept that fleet, right? Pearl Harbor. FDR's problems increase. On September 27th, Germany, Italy, Japan agreed on military cooperation, the Tripartite Pact. From that moment on, they're called the Axis powers, which refer to the Rome, Berlin, Tokyo axis. Several allies of Germany would join up with the three countries: Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, and Croatia. Now, through all of this, the International Olympic Committee is going to hold the Olympics in Japan. And it gets worse than that. The International Olympic Committee had selected Sapporo, Japan as the host of the 6th edition of the Winter Olympics, 1940, scheduled between February 3rd and 12th. But Japan gives the Games back to the International Olympic Committee in July 1938 after the outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937. The International Olympic Committee says, okay, we'll put the Olympics in St. Moritz in Switzerland. Except they said no, even though they hosted it in 1928. Then the IOC is scrambling to find another place. And they would. Hitler's Germany. That's where the 1940 Winter Olympics were going, to Germany. In the spring of 1939, the IOC gave the 1940 Olympics, now scheduled February 2nd through 11th, to an area near Munich, Germany, where the 1936 Games, the Winter Games, were held, not long after the Hitler Games in 1936. Well, Germany invaded Poland on September 1st to ignite what would become World War II, and the Winter Games canceled in November of 1939. The Summer Games were also supposed to be in Japan, the Tokyo Olympics. The IOC president, the Count, and if you hang around the Olympics long enough, you meet a lot of sirs and counts and lords, and like Lord Killian and all these other people. Out of work royalty, I think. Anyway, the Belgian Count, Henri Bollée-Latour, was predispositioned to treat politics and sports as separate issues. And in July 1936, with Germany's backing, Tokyo won out over Helsinki to host the next Games. They're going to give it to Tokyo. And there is Latour, and there is Hitler. Hey, they're enjoying the Olympics in Berlin in 1936. The 1940 Olympics began to dissolve on July 7, 1937, when Japanese and Chinese troops clashed at the Marco Polo Bridge southwest of Beijing. Well, the IOC, hey, so much you got wars going on. We don't care about that. We're going to have the Olympics anyway. The initial reaction, let's put the Games in Helsinki, Finland, except there was this problem of Germany invading Poland, and also Finland and the Soviets are in the middle of war, so that's out the window. The USSR-Finland War. The Winter War, or the First Soviet-Finnish War, began with the Soviet invasion of Finland on November 30th, 1939, and ended 3.5 months later with the Moscow Peace Treaty. Hey, Stalin wanted some land. You know, if Hitler could get some land without any problems in Austria, or if they give him land in Czechoslovakia, why can't I take land? 1939, Soviets sought to push its border with Finland westward because they wanted some security for Leningrad in a potential German attack. Soviets also wanted to gain control of several Finnish islands in the Gulf of Finland and secure a 30-year lease at a naval base at Hanko in Finland. The Winter War wasn't a long war, but it was there. Finland refused, and the Soviets said, okay, we're going to come in and we're going to invade you. Now, Britain and France had some other problems at this point, and they would not help Finland out. So the exhausted Finns made peace, treated Moscow. It was on Soviet terms. March 12th, the Finns decide they're going to give up land and allow the construction of a Soviet naval base on the Hanko Peninsula. Trotsky is killed. Trotsky is killed. Communist. He was one of the organizers of the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, which overthrew the Russian Tsar Nicholas II and subsequent provisional government. After the death of Vladimir Lenin, January 1924, and the rise of Joseph Stalin, Trotsky lost power. He was expelled from the Soviet Union February 1929 and spent the rest of his life in exile, an open critic of Stalinism. He hated Stalin. It's August 20th, 1940, and Trotsky is attacked in a study by a Spanish-born NKVD agent, Ramon Mercado, who used an ice pick as his weapon. Trotsky died the next day. Well, it's the final solution. This is what Germany started talking about in 1939, except in 1939 they wanted to exile all the Jews, just throw them out of Germany, but they found out the world was not accepting of Jews, whether it was the St. Louis or Britain allowing Jews into Palestine. There were some people who allowed Jews in, Dominican Republic, Shanghai, among others, but not many. Auschwitz, Birkenau opens. Hitler determined not to just isolate the Jews in Germany and countries annexed by the Nazis, but he's going to subject them to dehumanizing regulations and random acts of violence. Not that he wasn't doing it with Kristallnacht and all that other stuff. Hitler became convinced that his Jewish problem would only be solved with the elimination of every Jew in his domain, along with artists, educators, Romas or gypsies, communists, homosexuals, the mentally and physically handicapped. You can make a case that Hitler was mentally handicapped, so he would have killed himself, or others deemed unfit for survival in Nazi Germany. So why did Hitler hate Jews so much? Why was he so anti-Semitic? During the First World War, between 1914 and 1918, Hitler was a soldier in the German army. At the end of the war, he and many other German soldiers, like him, couldn't get over the defeat of the German Empire. We're Germany, how could we lose? The German army spread a myth that the army didn't lose the war on the battlefield, but they had been betrayed. Who betrayed them? Who betrayed them? Well, it was called a stab in the back. Hitler bought into the myth. Jews and communists betrayed the country and brought a left-wing government into power that wanted to just throw in the towel. 1923, he writes this book called Mein Kampf. His struggle, my struggle. What struggle? You're an obscure wallpaper hanger. He painted rooms. Hitler predicted that a general European war that would result in the extermination of the Jewish race in Germany. It was written in jail after he was arrested for his participation in the beer hall push in Munich, November 9th and 10th, 1923. He was released from jail December 1924. Take a look at these guys. These are Nazi Party members in 1922. By blaming the Jews for the defeat, he creates a stereotypical enemy. 1920s, 1930s, the defeated country was in a major economic crisis. According to the Nazis, we get out of it by throwing every Jew out of Germany. Political message in the promise to make Germany economically strong again won Hitler the 1932 election. That's Rudolf Höss, commandant of Auschwitz. The concentration camp opened on June 14th. Largest concentration camp and death camp of all. It was located in southern Poland. Hitler had a Jewish problem in 1939. What was his problem? All the Jews that lived in Poland. And the camp initially served as a detention center for political prisoners. Höss designed and built the concentration camps from old army barracks in Poland, and it becomes a killing machine capable of murdering 2,000 people an hour. Meanwhile, Hollywood studios begin to understand the depth of the problem in Western Europe. These guys, the Three Stooges. Would you think that the Three Stooges would be the first voice in film and one of the first voices to express concern about Hitler? Yes or no? The Three Stooges of all people. Curly, playing Goring there, Moe being Hitler, and Larry. Cheers, Goebbels. You Nazi Spy was released in January. You Nazi Spy is significant because it came at a time when Hollywood studios were trying to placate Nazi Germany and bowing to German pressure to sanitize films that might be slightly critical of the Third Reich. Why? Germany was a big market for movies. The days before the war, studio heads didn't want to lose that market. And if they put out movies that were perceived as too critical of Hitler and his policies, people won't come to the movies. Well, take a look at that. Curly, goose stepping. Moe with the mustache. And there's Larry, also goose stepping. This is the first of many propaganda films, except it wasn't a propaganda film, it was a satire. The short includes Moe's Hitler, a Hitler lookalike, including an on-again, off-again toothbrush mustache in uniform. Curly is Field Marshal Gallstone, a direct take on Germany's Field Marshal Goring, with a touch of Mussolini thrown in for good measure. And Larry as the Minister of Propaganda, a skewering of Hitler's Joseph Goebbels. The three stooges sport the national emblem. Snakes intertwine to form backwards swastikas. The country is called Moronica. It has a slogan, Moronica for morons, a direct parody of Nazi Germany's Germany for Germans. They would repeatedly yell, Heil. Moe Howard and his brother Jerome, Curly, Larry Fine, and the Columbia studio boss, Harry Cohn, were Jewish. And then comes the next one, Charlie Chaplin, the great dictator. He produced, wrote, directed, and starred in The Great Dictator, playing both the badly disguised, buffoonish dictator Arnold Hankin, and an unassuming Jewish barber who is his spitting image. Chaplin sought to make the movie that warned about the dangers of fascism, stir up empathy for the persecuted European Jews, and called for direct action. But America First is still out there, and they're trying to influence the election. When you vote for Roosevelt or Wilkie or whoever you're going to vote for, your ballot box against the war, America First Committee. Public opinion, though, would gradually shift from favoring complete neutrality to supporting limited U.S. aid to the Allies, short of actual intervention in the war. Now, there's still a problem in the South, but Booker T. Washington is placed on a stamp. He isn't placed on the stamp that everybody is buying in those days, because it was, what, 1 cent, 2 cents, or 3 cents? It's placed on a 10-cent stamp. That's kind of rich, right? Booker T. Washington, the legendary educator and author, who went from slave to esteemed orator and the founder of the Tuskegee Institute, was the first African-American to be honored with an American stamp. Washington's inclusion on not one, but 2 postage stamps during the 1940s represented a postal first. And Hattie McDaniel won an Oscar. First African-American to ever win an Oscar.
Gone with the Wind.
Gone with the Wind, yeah. Hattie McDaniel took the stage at the 12th Academy Awards in 1940, and she's the only black woman in the room. 46-year-old actress from Gone with the Wind was the first African-American nominated for an Oscar. But the ceremony was held at the segregated Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. That's the place where Bobby Kennedy was shot in 1968 and recently came down. Producer David O. Selznick had to petition for McDaniel to be allowed into the hotel's glitzy Coconut Grove nightclub where it was held. McDaniel delivered a thank you speech she had written with the help of Ruby Berkeley Goodwin. It has made me feel very, very humble, and I shall always hold it as a beacon for anything I might be able to do in the future. I sincerely hope I shall always be a credit to my race and to the motion picture industry. When Gone with the Wind debuted in December 1939, it debuted in Atlanta. The entire cast was there except for one person, Hattie McDaniel, because of Georgia's segregation and Jim Crow laws. So she was not at the premiere of the movie. She experienced racial segregation and racism throughout her career. And like I said, she could not go to the premiere. It was held in a whites-only theater. At the Ambassador Hotel, she couldn't stay in the same room. She sat at a segregated table on the side of the room where nobody would see her. General Davis, that's Benjamin Oliver Davis Sr. He was an Army general. He was the first African American to rise to the rank of Brigadier General in 1940. He was the first. Anybody remember the movie Fantasia?
Yes.
Then you didn't see it. Oh.
I do.
That's a joke. That's a joke. I worked for a drive-in movie in 1974. I was 18 years old. And we had Fantasia for 4 weeks. And you could get any drug you wanted at the Rockland Drive-In movie in Muncie, New York during the showing of Fantasia. This was a marijuana movie. These people would be as high as could be watching this movie. It wasn't intended to be a pothead movie, but it became one.
I can see that.
You could see that? Oh, did you ever experience it that way?
No, but I could just see people with the colors and the music.
Okay, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Fantasia is an animated musical anthology film produced and released by Walt Disney Productions. It's Disney's third animated film. It consists of 8 animated segments set to classical music conducted by Leopold, oh, that's another cartoon, Leopold Starotsky, several of which performed by the Philadelphia Orchestra. But RKO, they were the ones who distributed Disney films, they didn't really want to distribute it because it's long-haired music. Nobody's going to sit there for 2 hours and 5 minutes plus an intermission listening to long-haired music, and the movie lost money. It became a cult film for teenagers and college kids and all those people because of the reasons you mentioned.
Yeah, there's no talking in it,
There's no
right?
talking.
There's no
Yeah.
talking. I remember I didn't
But
like it.
you know, if you're one toke over the line, hey, it's a great movie. Pinocchio also comes out. Remember Pinocchio?
Yeah.
It's also an American animated musical fantasy film produced by Walt Disney based on the 1883 Italian children's novel, The Adventures of Pinocchio. The plot involves an old Italian woodcarver named Geppetto who carves a wooden puppet named Pinocchio and wishes that the boy might be a real boy. The film got positive reviews, but guess what? It died at the box office.
Really?
It died at the box office.
I like Pinocchio.
Why? People didn't go see it. It's become beloved, right?
Yeah.
But when it came, well, you know what also was a dud at the box office when it came out? Wizard of Oz.
Oh, yeah. You told me
Wizard
that.
of Oz was a dud.
Really?
Bugs Bunny is born. Bugs Bunny. Everything I learned in life, I learned from Warner Brothers cartoons. I can safely say that. And there he is, Bugs Bunny. And back in 1990, you could buy glasses. Celebrating Bugs Bunny's 50th anniversary, I only have about 9 of those glasses. It's my hero. Great comic. I mean, you know, he and Elmer Fudd were, you know, one of the best comedy duos ever in the history of comedy duos, even though they were cartoons. I always wished I could go out to dinner with Bugs Bunny. And I know I'd pick up the tab. I think it would be great. He would have been a great Borscht Belt comic. Great Borscht Belt comic. So anyway, it's July 27th and Bugs Bunny makes his first appearance in Tex Avery's A Wild Hare. The Warner Brothers short is widely considered the first definitive Bugs Bunny cartoon in which the character's appearance, personality, and voice all gelled as one. And it's also the first time that Bugs said, "What's up, Doc?" voiced by Mel Blanc. Captain America made his debut in 1940. Captain America, in the 60s, I used to watch the Captain America cartoons on Channel 9 at 7 o'clock every night. It was a comic book that was published, went on sale in December, with the cover featuring the character punching Adolf Hitler. The first issue sold for 10 cents. It was dated March 1941, despite the fact it was available in 1940. New York's World's Fair. Anybody go to New York's World's Fair in 1939? You went there in 39?
Well, I don't know what year, but I've been to the Titanic.
When you were a little kid?
Yeah.
When you were a little kid. Very little kid.
You went to Natalie?
Yeah,
I think.
you went to it too. There was a woman who told me a couple of weeks ago, I was doing the 1939 talk, and she said she loved going there. I said, why? She said the first electric door was introduced. And she kept going like this and like that. So her mother said, stop, there are other attractions here. She went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But anyway, there's the New York World's Fair. And it was a money loser. The second and last season of this edition of the World's Fair closed on October 27th. Budget overruns ended up leaving the World's Fair as a financial failure. Nylon stockings. Anybody use nylon stockings? They were introduced at the World's Fair in 1940, and they're a hit sensation, the nylon stockings.
What about the one in Chicago? Did that make money?
Some of them did, some of them didn't.
Oh.
Montreal did in 1967. Nylon stockings made their debut, or its debut, at the World's Fair in 1939. But by the time the stockings were released for sale on May 15, 1940, demand was so high that women flocked to stores by the thousands. 4 million pairs of nylon sold out within 4 days. 4 days. There is an ongoing dispute from World War II, and it's these islands between Japan and Russia. After the Russians invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Russians decided to do something about the Kuril Islands dispute, also known as the Northern Territories dispute in Japan. In March 2022, the Russian military started a military exercise involving 3,000 troops claimed on the island. Japan claimed that the Soviet Union illegally seized the 4 islands after its surrender in 1945. Neither side has signed the peace treaty. Technically, World War II has never ended. The 1940 legacy. This is Pearl Harbor in Honolulu on Oahu, and I'm walking into it. So I decide, hey, it's pretty cool, let's take that, as you walk the plank going into it. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. America declared war on Japan the next day. Hitler and Mussolini declared war on the United States December 11th, 1941. The first American committee dissolved on December 11th, 1941. The 1940 legacy. Rudolf Haas was the first person at such a senior level to admit to the extent of the slaughter at Auschwitz. He was handed over to the Americans eventually. He testified at Nuremberg. He was then passed to the Poles, who prosecuted him, hanged him on the gallows next to the Auschwitz crematorium in 1947. Hitler and Mussolini. 2018, a forensic study remains by Russian intelligence for 7 decades determined with World War II lost, Hitler killed himself in a bunker in Berlin, April 30th, 1945. On April 28, 1945, El Duce, Benito Mussolini, and his mistress, Clara Petacchi, are shot by Italian partisans who captured the couple as they attempted to flee to Switzerland. That was an exhibit in Lower Manhattan about the Holocaust prior to COVID. And you walk through these doors and they ask a question: what happened to all the Germans? What happened to all the Nazis? In 2021, a survey said 1 in 10 young Americans believe that the Holocaust never happened, while 23% thought it was a myth or that the number of those killed has been exaggerated. 50-state survey of Americans aged between 18 and 39, 12% said they had never heard or thought they never heard of the word Holocaust. In August 2022, the Keller Independent School District in Texas pulled Anne Frank's diary adaptation from school bookshelves. In April 2023, Anne Frank's diary, the graphic adaptation, was removed from a library, Vero Beach, Florida High School, after a leader of Moms for Liberty, they're supposed to be all about freedom, right? Is in Indian River County raised an objection. The book is required reading in German schools. That's the Enola Gay. This is a museum, a Smithsonian Museum outside the Dulles Airport in Virginia. You got paid for this one. It was $15 4 years ago. And there's the plane that delivered the first atomic bomb, Hiroshima. Many as about 140,000 people would ultimately die from the blast on August 6, 1945. Not everybody perished immediately. There were health issues caused by intense radioactive fallout, claimed thousands of lives in months and years afterwards. We have a friend whose father was exposed to all of that during the testing, and she has some severe physical problems passed on by her father. The day after the Nagasaki bombing, on August 9, 1945, President Harry S. Truman issued his first affirmative command regarding the bomb. No more strikes without his express authorization. He never issued the order to drop the bombs. That was a military decision. But he did issue the order to stop dropping them. After the war, Henri Philippe Pétain was tried and convicted for treason in France. He was originally sentenced to death, but due to his age and his World War I service, his sentence was commuted to life in prison. Hirohito, he led Japan. His life was spared, but other Japanese leaders were executed. That is St. Petersburg, Russia, a place that I don't think I'd be too welcomed in today right now. The end of World War II saw the United States and the Soviet Union's relationship crumble, with the Cold War starting in 1946. 1,600 Nazi scientists and others would move to America to work on defense programs, Operation Paperclip, and the space program, including the father of the United States space program, Wernher von Braun. The hunt for Nazis is still global to this day, if they can find any left. China, free of Japan, would see a civil war and become a communist country in 1949. That's a subway, St. Petersburg, Russia. Soviet Union fell in 1991, lasted 74 years, but the problems remain between the United States and its successor, Russia. On October 3rd, 1990, East and West Germany reunited after 45 years. This is in Rostock, formerly East Germany, and it basically says Nazis are not welcome in that sign in former East Germany, now Germany. After the war ended in 1945, the Allies occupied West Germany, outlawed the Nazi Party, worked to purge its influence from every aspect of German life. Germany has strict laws banning political parties, and only two have been outlawed since the defeat of the Nazis at the end of World War II. The neo-Nazi Socialist Reich Party in 1952 and the German Communist Party in 1956. Frankly, I don't give a damn. In 2020, Warner Media removed Gone with the Wind from its streaming platform HBO Max for 2 weeks. HBO Max, now called Max, said the 1939 film was a product of its time and depicted ethnic and racial prejudices that were wrong then and wrong today. When the movie returned to the platform, a disclaimer video discussed the movie's history and put it into context of 1939 or 1940 entertainment. They have not done that for a couple Bugs Bunny cartoons, including Bugs Bunny Nips the Nip and a totally racist cartoon, which they redid as an Elmer Fudd cartoon. Those are part of the Forbidden 11, which are now never seen again. Since the 1940s, the comic book character Captain America has been presented in a variety of other media, including serials, feature films, animations, video games. Charlie Chaplin remains one of the greatest and widely loved silent movie stars, considered a comedic genius. And Bugs Bunny, what can I say about Bugs Bunny? I come from a family of entertainers. My cousin was Jerry Stiller, Ben Stiller. Stella Adler is a relative on that side. She had the drama school or the acting school. Her daughter-in-law was Judy Holliday, who's related to me. The studio is now run by, or rather the acting school is now run by Tom Oppenheimer. But Bugs Bunny still remains my comedic icon. Oh, these guys, Moe, Larry, and Curly. They did 3 movies, Nazi-themed movies. You Nazi Spy, I'll Never Heil Again, Back from the Front. And of course, they were put on the hit list by Hitler. He never got it. Edward R. Murrow is considered one of the finest radio and TV journalists ever in the United States. He helped bring down the Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy in 1954 during a CBS television public affairs show after McCarthy spent about 4 years of accusing people of being communists without any proof. And Franklin Roosevelt, he would go on to win a 4th term in 1944. The 22nd Amendment to the Constitution was proposed in 1947 as a direct response to Franklin Roosevelt's 4-term presidency. It limited elected presidents to 2 terms in office and was ratified February 1951. Because he was grandfathered in, Harry Truman conceivably could have run for president in 1952 and served a term. And the 1964-1965 New York World's Fair, also a financial flop. Thank you so much. Any questions, any comments? Your turn.